The Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
Before I do anything else, I'm pleased to welcome you all here to the Poetry Center at Passaic County Community College, and to say that this reading series and Poetry Works USA and all the awards and book awards and poetry contests and work in the schools that we do is all made possible by grants from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, New National Endowment for the Arts, by private donations from individual people who become members and donors to the center, and also by the support we receive from Passaic County Community College in designating this building as the cultural center for the college, and also in all the support they provide us in terms of janitorial support and also security guards and all that kind of thing. And so really they give us a great deal of help for keeping the Poetry Center going. And I'm really appreciative of that. And I want to particularly mention that Dr. Stephen Rose, who is the president of the college, has been extremely supportive of the Poetry Center. And if I need something or need to do something or need to have a festival or some other thing, he always finds a way for me to be able to do that and to support the programs that we run out of the Poetry Center. So I do want to thank Dr. Rose and the fine job he's done as president of the college. Today, we're going to have two wonderful poets, and we have Vivian Shipley, who is Connecticut State University Distinguished Professor and is the editor of the Connecticut Review. She teaches at Southern Connecticut State University, where she was named Faculty Scholar in 2000, 2005, and 2008. Her ninth book, All of Your Messages Have Been Erased, what a wonderful title, was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. Hard Boot Poems, New and Old, received the 2006 Paterson Prize for Sustained Literary Achievement and the Connecticut Press Club Prize for Best Creative Writing. She has received the Library of Congress Connecticut Lifetime Achievement Award for services to the literary community and the Connecticut Book Award for Poetry. Other poetry awards include Lucille Medwick Prize from the Poetry Society of America and the Robert Frost Foundation Poetry Prize. In addition to all those facts about Vivian, I do want to say that I've known Vivian for a number of years, many years. We won't say how many years, Vivian, but we've known each other quite a long time as poetry friends and literary friends, and then just as friends. And I admire very much Vivian's desire to help other people and to be a force for bringing people together and making sure that her students get to meet people who can help them, and making sure that other poets get to meet people who can help them. Also, I love what she did with the Connecticut Review and how she transformed it from a really boring, this is on television, I'm sorry, from a really boring literary magazine that looked like what it was, a magazine that was an interior magazine for a state college that really didn't make any attempt to go beyond the borders of the college, to a magazine that's nationally known, that's beautiful, that has this wonderful artwork in it. I mean, she did such an amazing job. I don't want to rave on and on, but I do love Vivian Shipley, and I'm really pleased to welcome her back to the Poetry Center.
Thank you, Maria. I'm not sure that all of you here know. Can everybody hear me? Good? I'm not sure all of you know here that Maria was just given a very, very major award by Poets and Writers, and it was a big banquet in New York City. John Grisham was the other recipient, so you can have some idea of the magnitude. And the award was given for her wonderful poetry, but also for her friendship for the help that she's given to all of the writers in the United States and everywhere too. And she's been hobnobbing with the likes of the Kennedys and so on. So she's back in Paterson now with me. And I'm grateful to be invited back. It's always nice to be invited someplace one time, but when you get invited back, that's the highest compliment. I'm going to be reading today from a new chapbook called Greatest Hits. It's put out by Pudding House, and they ask you to pick out 12 poems that you sort of like the best that span your lifetime. And then my newest book, All of Your Messages Have Been Erased. And I'm proud this is sort of a family venture. My son, who's sitting back here, took the photo on the cover, and then my middle son designed the cover. So this is a family venture, and then I wrote the poems, but I like my cover. I like to begin with a poem that I normally start out a reading with, which explains why I started writing poetry. Taylor told me that he starts writing poetry when he was about 5. I was in my 30s and had never written a poem in my life. Toe could rhyme with dough, but I didn't care. And in my early 30s, I was pregnant with my second son, Todd, who designed the book. And I started having seizures. They discovered I had a huge brain tumor. Fortunately, Todd was born, but I had the tumor removed, and I actually lived. They thought I was going to die. But after I got better and came home, I started writing poetry. And it sort of interrupted my life because I was not prepared to begin writing poetry. It didn't seem like quite the thing I should be doing. I already had a Victorian PhD from Vanderbilt, a job teaching with that. And so this really did sort of interrupt my life. But I started writing poetry, and I never stopped writing poetry. I never went back to being a scholar. Not that there's been a hue and cry from the world about it, but I didn't. So I'd like to read you this first poem, which is called Praying, Be Whole. And this poem was written as a poem to my youngest son, took the cover picture. When I was pregnant with him, I was afraid, the doctors were afraid that something would happen to me because of the tumor, which had been removed and what it had done to my brain. And so they had given me all these warnings about giving birth. So I wrote this poem for Matthew to have in case I didn't, quite make it through. It's called Praying, Be Whole. I hold my breath as the ultrasound lines shape of skull, thumbs, fingers like germinating beans, lungs not yet inflated, ribs thin as twigs. The aorta, I name arms, legs, spine of Matthew, the third boy to be stuffed under my heart. I have a bad memory, can't recall giving birth to my second son, Todd. I was pregnant, but with a growth that did not blossom as he did. A tumor in my brain didn't part my hair or sprout from the bulb, bigger than an amaryllis, hidden above my right eye. Like a tomb, bone does not swell. Early in the morning, seizures jerked me as if I were a puppet on strings. Todd had to tear his way through me into his first afternoon and turn from milk for life to the hands of a stranger who fingered his cheek. No way to scalpel the heart. His cry stayed inside me to fill my breasts that were left to burn, unplucked like live oak trees. It hung on to be tormented by a winter wind, and even if he could have sucked my nipples, Todd's body would not have shielded me from the arteriogram, femoral stick done from a textbook diagram. The technician did not know who I was, who was being entered, or when a clot might break loose. Smell was not my baby's mouth, but sour stabs of the surgeon's breath, as he pulled down his green mask to tell me the news was good. Only half of my skull would be replaced, and the meningioma could be removed. Vain as ever, I knew hair grows back even on heads of the dead. A faucet of anesthesia dripped. I held my doctor's wrist as if asking him to go with me to meet something. A hospital sheet was not eased over my eyes. Breath of desire returned. Today, a nurse pins up a Polaroid of Matthew burrowing in my womb. Like weathermen, new doctors have posted my delivery chart with alerts, giving me storm warnings. The tumor's souvenir, joints in my fingers have stiffened as if from deep cold. I can't stitch an heirloom quilt to leave if I do not hold this third son. Matthew will have these words of love he can wrap around himself or hold up like a flare. This is the first time my son's ever heard me read. It's quite an experience for me. The next poem I'd like to share with you is the final poem in this book, and it's a poem about mangoes. I talked about it in our workshop, so I thought I would read it. And it came from reading an article about mangoes. I had no idea that there were 3 kinds of mangoes, and there are. And it's also a poem about coming to terms with grief. After I lost both of my parents, it took me some time to accommodate to the loss. I think we all feel our individual losses very acutely. Loss of my parents was a normal one. They were both old, but yet it was very difficult for me. And when you try to put your grief in context of the terrible things that happen in the world, I think it's a difficult thing to do. So this was the poem that I wrote about that. It's called Mango Season in Cambodia. Tired of annotating my scars, trying to gain perspective about my ordinary deaths, I watch men who have given both legs to landmines scoot on wheeled wooden sleds to beg in the center of town or on the apron of a road. Not wanting to founder in grief, I avoid lure of stupas, burial monuments like one I just bought for my parents. Trees fringing field scrub in pre-dawn or deep violet and remind me of my mother's inner elbow when blood was taken, or bruises on my father after early morning falls. Nothing has ever scoured me like the grief of women who saw daughters dissolve on Pol Pot's forced marches north into the jungle, or were forced to witness husbands being eviscerated for sin of greed after eating foraged yams. Sent to herd cattle, clear land, build huts, hearts that lived through Khmer Rouge, ruptured at the suicide of sons who could not endure the crawl of that world. Ache left in those mothers that nothing will soothe helps me right myself. I vowed not to try and escape my loss on tour buses that chase sunrise to ruins at Angkor Wat, but learn from Cambodian food branded by the grief of Khmer cooks who parse sweet and sour notes, alternate solid and liquid, raw and cooked. Understanding my hunger, a chef in Siem Reap explains that memory of curried fish laced with bamboo and water lilies nourishes his spirit. But trying to regain one perfect meal, one perfect taste he had created was as futile as trying to bring back my parents. Still, I am on edge. Watching a street vendor make a shallow incision in a mango and pull upward, lifting rather than slicing blushing skin, even sound of the green peel ripping away is unsettling. To soothe myself, I accept his offer to sample 3 kinds. Flesh of the cheapest and most common is gaudy orange, fibrous and cloyingly sweet. His mid-range mango, the dusty orange gold of monk's robes, is also sweet, but slivers of sour run through it like ice. Treating myself to his most expensive mango, I let juice drip down my chin. Sweetness is balanced by spicy, musky, and tart flavors. Flesh is smooth and creamy, the color of the gold moon, or forsythia, my mother forced to bloom by putting brown sugar in a vase. I had not traveled to Cambodia for the mango season, but biting into the fruit, I found what I was seeking. How it is bitterness which eventually numbs the tongue, and sourness which lingers in the mouth, that changes the way things taste, and how the sweet becomes sweeter next to sorrow, next to grief. this next poem I'd like to share with you is a poem about my middle son, and it's what I would call literally a found poem. It's about Todd, who loves to fish. He takes out a big orange ocean-going kayak. We live in the summer on a place called Morgan Point. And so he goes out there and fishes, not anymore because he's got twins, but he used to go out and fish. And this poem literally happened. Now Todd is just totally not like me. He goes out there and he sits for 4 or 5 hours in that kayak, and then he catches and releases. But it's for his spirit, to nourish his spirit. I mean, I can understand probably for drinking or something, but come on. So he goes out there and he's just, at peace with the world. And so one day he'd been out fishing and he brought this giant fish back, which he normally never does, but I guess he was still a child enough in his 30s to want to impress his mother and father. And so this is a poem about that experience. And I think I've chosen it as the first poem in this volume because it's a poem about the importance of the heart and how the individual heart, how it holds on through all kinds of difficulties and why it just can't let go until it does. And the poems in the book are about people whose messages have been erased. They're about a number of different people whose lives were taken from them or interrupted by forces that were really beyond their control. And they're all, as you will hear, fairly serious poems, but they're about voices that I hope to help preserve by writing these poems about them. But this first one is titled Nature, Red in Tooth and Claw. And this is a quote from In Memoriam by Alfred Lord Tennyson. You've got to use a Victorian PhD every now and then if you've got one. Come on, flash it around. There you go. For the life of me, I can't fathom why my son spends hours floating by a breakwater protecting New Haven's harbor from Long Island Sound. Trailing an eel or sandworm, Todd crams his 6 feet 5 inches into an orange kayak, only to catch and release. If he were sensible, thrifty like me, he'd utilize his time, stock up on fillets from blues or stripers. How can he fish? Not for the meat, but for the solitude, to nourish his spirit. Tonight, it may have been a return to childhood need to impress his father and me that prompted him to bring back a striped bass, over 40 inches long. Watching Todd hoist it like bagged topsoil for my camera, I figure 50 pounds. Calling the fish she, it was too fat to be a male. My son tries to return life he's taken back into the water. All elbows, waiting by touch in the pewter cove, slow dancing with the striper, Todd holds her tail for well over half an hour. Because mosquitoes are biting his neck, I resist saying the fish will end up a floater a day later. Responding to my silent cheerleading on our deck, she does not swim. I learned to rationalize death of what I eat in a Siem Reap market while watching a Buddhist Cambodian woman who would not kill in order to eat flesh. Admiring a fish just hauled out of Tonal Sap, a large freshwater lake, she said the carp would be perfect for her curry. Her mouth covered by one hand, she mumbled it was too bad the fish was still alive. The fishmonger caught up to her as she paused in another stall, shouting out the miracle. The carp had suddenly died. Having given up on a resurrection in the cove, my son appears to tease the striped bass back to life, separating skin with his knife, slicing from behind the gill to the bottom of the spine. Curious about what it's eaten, plunging into the guts, Todd pulls out a whole lobster, then another claw. To show off my Victorian PhD, I give my son a quick course on Darwin's Origin of the Species. Even though I know what he will find, I quote from In Memoriam. We trust that somehow good will be the final goal of ill. Blood slicking forearms, his hand probing, Todd will feel how firmly the heart holds before it lets go. The next series of poems I'd like to read are poems of tribute, poems of memory, and I hope that if you aren't aware of these girls, that these poems make you aware. they're poems about girls that were called the Radium Girls. And in Waterbury, Connecticut, there's a Waterbury clock factory, and young girls in their teens, were hired to paint watch faces with radium. It was during the war, so that the faces would glow. And they painted the watch faces with radium, and they were taught to lip point. So they dipped the brush into the radium and lip point. Naturally, they all died hideous deaths from radium poisoning. Their jaws fell out, their bones crumbled. Just absolutely one horrible chapter in our history. The owners of the factory knew what was happening, didn't stop it. And in the Waterbury Timex took over the company. There's a big museum in Waterbury. There's not even a mention of the Radium Girls. Now, you share that heritage with Connecticut. The U.S. Radium Company, Orange, New Jersey, and other places in New Jersey did the same thing. They exposed young women to radium, knowing what was happening, what it would do to them. And they all died hideous deaths. The company presidents everywhere tried to negate the history, tried to deny it happened, didn't want to give them medical benefits, and so on. And so I think it's a really dark chapter in our history. It did fortunately bring about some reforms, in industry and some accountability. But what I decided to do was to write a series of poems about these girls. And so it's a series about young girls who died with their names. The age that I give after their name is the age that they died. Now, I had difficulty in trying to write this poem, and I wrote it after I read an article about how they were trying to vacuum radium out of the walls of an apartment that had been part of the Waterbury Clock Company. So in this poem, the structure of the poem, the girls' voices are being sucked from the walls. And so as they are sucked from the walls, they are speaking to you. So in this poem, I'm having the girls, the Radium Girls who died, speak to you. Now, the first woman, May Keene, was 97, and she lived a long life because she was really bad at painting. She got fired immediately. And so because she got fired immediately, it saved her life. And the first poem sets the structure for the rest of the poems. February 1, 2004. May Keene, 97, speaks to men cleaning Enterprise Apartment 507, Waterbury, Connecticut. Wear white lab coats, plastic masks, and rubber gloves while you vacuum radioactive dust from wooden floors. Scrape, then scrub radium from the ceiling and walls. But you will still inhale my history. This Cherry Street room was a radium dial studio from 1919 to 1927. Waterbury Clock Company owners dressed like you inspected this room. Knew radium would kill me and my 17 girlfriends who died with bones crumbling, jaws rotting. 1926, I just turned 19. Thought painting glow-in-the-dark watch faces would be respectable. Paid 8 cents a dial. My boss said, work faster, sharpen bristles with my lips. Lip-pointing bitter taste of radium made me gag. The day I made 62 cents, he growled, find another job. I want to trample dials underfoot, let him know I was on the way to better things. But I was dazed, a toad. To breathe clean air, take a break, go to the Time Expo Museum just a few yards away. Sure, you'll see 150 years of timepieces, Timex's torture test, but you won't find a word about us, the Radium Girls. Timex has never admitted we're part of its history. Out front is a 40-foot Easter Island statue, but no black marble monument chiseled with birth and death dates for girls whose futures contracted, who dreamed in past tense. Statistics, their sores did not heal, their tongues were not freed. Canaries in the coal mine, song in their throat was a prayer, their deaths could save others. Memory, more bitter than radium that tunneled into their heart, is in this room's walls you are disturbing. Awakened, voices of the girls who work there are not erased, will not be stilled any longer. They are filtering through. Frances Flecklochter, 21. February 1925, first dial painter to die in Waterbury. I lip pointed for 4 years. Did think it strange that my handkerchief glowed in the dark when I blew my nose, but church members, makers of Waterbury dollar watches, would never have let young girls like us do anything harmful. First, I mixed glue, water, radium powder to make glowing greenish white paste, then applied it with a camel hair brush to dial numbers. A few strokes, brushes lost their shape, and I couldn't paint accurately. My teacher told me to point the brush with my lips. I did this about 6 times for every watch dial. The paint didn't taste funny. It didn't have any taste. Next to me, racks of altimers and clock dials waited, like upturned faces of children I would never have. Edna Steberet, 35. Only 21, my friend Frances went to a better place with no numbers to paint for men with hearts that beat like wind-up watches that ticked off her days. It was publicity, not her death, that caused Waterbury Clock Company to officially ban lip pointing, but not the use of radium. I never stopped wetting my brush with my lips. I wanted money for clothes to attract a special guy. I knew watches I painted were going to troops overseas. I scratched my name and address on the back of dials. Lots of GIs were lonely, and they wrote to me. Was it so wrong to want to have fun? After work, I was covered with luminous powder. My clothes' fingers glowed. Hair shone in the dark. Some nights, I'd invite neighborhood kids over to come and play and watch Edna glow in the closet. First, there were holes for my tongue to probe. At the end, I lost all my teeth. Could not sit up or walk. No man wanted me then. In summer, positioned on the front porch, if I sat facing road, I wanted company. Sidewise, profile to the street, friends could say hello. My back to the road, I was in my housecoat, hair uncombed. Night swallowed my voice, needing to fool my weary heart. Like wise men going to Bethlehem, I searched sky for a word, for a star to guide me to what would come next. So I'm hopeful that these poems, if they do nothing else, they do help to arouse a sense of conscience, a sense of memory of these young women and of how they were innocently destroyed because they wanted to have fun. Girls like to have fun, but not to die from it. The last poem I'm going to read is the poem that the title of the book comes from. This is called The First Poem I've Ever Labeled Love Poem. It's from my husband, Ed Harris. Your face, ostrich in the New York Times. Each year there is less and less to say. Hope is what almost drowned us, but we are down to 3 words. Will not do, will not be. For us, it is a time of having and not wanting. What we did confess, our minds, still a blessing, have scabbed. The rest, it does not need to be forgiven. Water with no ambition for foam, we do not storm at each other. There are no lines dividing us like those in St. Louis, 1959, when metal plates lettered white and colored labeled 2 drinking fountains on every floor of your father's factory. I favor stasis because there will be no progress, but not you. The day after your 70th birthday, sick and tired of hearing me quote Wordsworth, "The world is too much with us, late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers." You finally decide to clean out the garage. Still impatient, you don't get down and move the stepladder, but stretch to pull out years from the loft. Free falling onto concrete, you cannot get up. I think of carrying my grandfather each night upstairs in a wooden chair. Going up, I bear the brunt on the lower end. Even when my sister backed down the steps in the morning, I could not reverse the weight. 7 years younger, the only way to save myself from the sudden descent into your old age is to unbolt the hasp you have on my heart. Leave you stretched on your back. Without love, the loss of you will not be as great. But it may be too late for me to harden. Practice going to dinner by myself. More and more, I have told no one but you what I really think. If your body is stripped from me, who will listen to my anger, my sorrow? Last night, when you blew out the candles on your cake, I strained to find words, compared you to an hourglass, praising the pile of sand you'd formed to keep us both from looking at how few grains were left. I was never the type to blow kisses willy-nilly to the wind, and you won't make promises about years you might not deliver. Knowing wanting will not make them happen. Yet, our bodies have memory, wings we can hinge on to lift us. Weren't we something in my yellow Porsche Targa? Bombay gin, India pale ale, dancing on the deck to Little Feet. I'll be your Dixie chicken if you'll be my Tennessee lamb, and we will walk together down in Dixieland, Dixieland. A precise man with words but no William Sapphire. To please you, I learned dusk is the dim part of twilight that marks beginning of night. If I can't stop gnawing at the days we have left, I'll fast forward, ease the twilight, just after sunset, when we sit watching our dogs swim out into the cove to chase blue herons unfolding to heaven. If I could, I'd bind us to a bench you bolted into Morgan Point's granite, to this spot of earth that we own, to Bear and Bailey, the bulldog, who bring us such happiness. We've lived with sea, waves have taught us what is planted in sand will disappear like sandpaper tracks on wet shore. The Chinese artist Song Dong kept a daily diary in water on stone. But why write a life when words will evaporate? Surely, knowledge of loss will teach me to cherish our sliver of time before darkness stows you in my art. A girl in Kentucky, I learned a way to keep you with me from my grandmother, who taught me that the soul rises from earth. It goes to what it knows. So I'll hang Cabernet Sauvignon bottles you emptied at night in the white pine branches to catch your spirit. And if the wind off Long Island Sound rocks them, you'll stir and call out to me through long nights. A boy in Missouri, milk delivered to the doorstep was in glass bottles capped with wax paper. There were two kinds of kids, those who loved film floating under the lid and those who wouldn't touch the scum. Never one to peel skin from surface. You don't share my fear of nothing. Believe there's no more to life than life. Still, I pray I'll feel air shift when I say your name, smell you when I enter a room. Neither of us prefers survival, but one of us will blow out the pilot light, leaving the other to finger our answering machine. All of your messages have been erased. Thank you all very much.